So the game Unknown Nine Awakening, that's the latest Bandai Namco AAA to hit the market, where you play as Haroona, a quester that has the ability to hop into an alternate dimension called the Fold, and her quest is all about fighting a secret society with a hostile agenda. Pretty straightforward, right? The game is Reflector Entertainment's first ever release, and it's looking like it's gonna join the non-stop trend of AAA games that release and then they just end up flopping miserably. Like, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I had never heard of this game until like 2 days before it came out. It looks like it almost had basically no marketing. But if you go based off actual results in terms of like the player base and the Steam reviews, well, the game was priced at $50, it peaked at just 285 concurrent players, and right now there's only 86 people in game. For a game that literally just came out, these numbers are not doing very well, to be honest. So for the most part, all the reviews are negative for the game, and you know, it's important to note that Unknown Nine Awakening is a single player game, and there's always going to be that argument that single player games don't rely on concurrent players to be successful, and while that is technically true since players can just play the game on their own time, well, the all-time peak is usually a good indicator whether the game is successful or not, because most people are going to be playing the game on the day of release. Like, a good example for this is Black Myth Wukong. It's a single player game too, but at one point it had over 2 million people playing it, so yeah, that's a pretty good indicator that this was a wildly successful game. But when you compare that to the numbers that Unknown Nine Awakening is pulling, this is looking like a colossal flop. I was going over the Steam reviews, and like, even the positive ones still, you know, talk about how bad the game is, and I did find out that there's a big reason why this game in particular might be getting a lot more hate than usual, and it has a lot to do with the person who was in charge of the game's story. But something I learned from going over the reviews is that a lot of people actually got this game for free, and yet somehow it still ended up flopping. Apparently AMD was offering a free copy of Unknown Nine Awakening if you just happen to buy one of their CPUs and GPUs. Like it says, product received for free, product received for free, free. You know, a lot of people actually got this game for free, and you know, that's not necessarily anything new, because when I got my graphics card, I got Shadow of the Tomb Raider or something like that. You know, I got a free game, so this whole practice of giving out games whenever you buy a graphics card, that's not necessarily like a new concept, but it's just really funny that, you know, despite the fact that they got all those free copies from people who bought the hardware, you also have like the game reviewers copy, the journalist copies, all of that, and the game was still unable to crack more than 285 players. For reference of how bad this actually is, well, Concord peaked at 697, so yeah, this was a catastrophe. I'm thinking that maybe they just knew beforehand that the game wasn't going to sell well, and they decided to save money on the marketing budget, but I was actually going over some of the gameplay with my stream chat on YouTube here the other day, which, you know, you guys should definitely stop by and chat sometime, and well, even then, while I was like sitting around with people, we really couldn't find a redeeming quality about the game, to be honest. You know, usually trailers and like gameplay footage like this, they're supposed to hype you up, they're supposed to get you motivated and interested in playing the game, but it's like the more you learn about Unknown Nine Awakening, the less interesting it actually seems. The gameplay itself really reminded me of those buggy Star Wars Outlaws compilations that you see on YouTube all the time. You know, you have your typical stealth sequences, you can hop between different realities, and you can also take control of other people as well, but like, the character animations, the enemy AI, you could actually tell that the enemy AI here was just horrible. They don't know what they're doing, and there were a few bugs in the game that just reminded me of the PlayStation 1. You know, it was just so funny bad that you just don't expect this sort of thing to happen on a AAA or just however many A's this game is supposed to have in 2024. The main character, Haroona, was actually modeled after the actress that plays Jennifer in the Witcher TV series. She did the motion capture for the game, and you know, overall, I think she's a great actress, but being the face of a video game that flopped so hard obviously can't be a good thing to have on your resume. And I was watching some of the interviews that she did as part of the game's marketing, and either she didn't know what the game was really about, or she wasn't really well informed, maybe she was having trouble remembering what she was supposed to say in the interviews, but just like, take a look at this.
I'm excited for people to hopefully feel empowered by this character who is so grounded, so inspired by like things that are outside herself, bigger than her, and I don't think I've ever seen that connection to a game as diverse as this, with that many voices and you know, that kind of, you know, that exploration.
It looks like she was just trying to remember her lines, that's all. Yeah, so that's not a very convincing clip. Like, if you're trying to sell me the game, it's not working, unfortunately. She actually just looks uncomfortable talking about it. Okay, so Reflector Entertainment. This is the first game they've ever worked on, and I think that they were banking on it to actually popping off because they have the video game. They were planning a novel trilogy. They were going for a scripted podcast, a comic book series. They were trying to expand it into its own universe, and I don't really think that's gonna happen. You know, you can't really get that much of a universe with only 285 players playing it. And of course, you know, this is just the Steam charts. There's PlayStation players as well that are not in this number. But when you have such a low number on one console that's only going down from here, you can only assume that every other console is on the same boat. Okay, so remember when I said that this game was going to get extra hate no matter what happened because of the person who was in charge of the story? Well, it just so happens that the lead story architect for the game, the person who had a major say on how the story unfolds, just so happens to be Kim Belair, the CEO of Sweet Baby Inc. Now, I know that just by hearing that name, it's like the boogeyman for some people. You know, they just have a knee-jerk reaction to hearing the name Kim Belair because Sweet Baby Inc., SBI, is a company that's gathered a pretty toxic reputation inside the gaming industry. It's like on the same level as Denuvo, the anti-piracy software that some companies use that a lot of people hate because it actually has a huge impact on game performance. Yeah, that's the same level of hate that Sweet Baby Inc. gets. And it's gotten to the point that some companies just outright refuse to work with SBI because of that bad rep that they've gathered over the years. So seeing how Unknown 9 Awakening doesn't just have consultation from SBI, but they also have direct involvement in the game, well, that's enough for a lot of people to just instantly write the game off without even looking at it. But in my opinion, if the gameplay really is as bad as they say, if it's really just this unfun to play Unknown 9 Awakening, then it doesn't really matter if the story was directed by SBI or not. You're not even gonna enjoy the game long enough for you to be invested in it. You know, like for the longest time, we had this sort of unspoken agreement between game studios and customers where if you make a good game, players will play it, right? We had like this sort of mutual understanding of what is a good game. But it's also important to highlight that like having a modern message about social issues in your game or having like this disinfected dialogue with the characters doesn't necessarily mean that the game is gonna flop. You know, gameplay is still king at the end of the day. In my personal opinion, sometimes going the overtly safe route to make sure that everyone's included and nobody's offended, that can take away from the actual experience, but it's not technically a deal breaker if the game is good enough. One of the biggest complaints I hear from people regarding Spider-Man 2, for example, is that none of the characters seem to have any sort of personality, and the writing is just safe. You know, it's just HR approved dialogue, but the gameplay is good enough to keep people engaged, so it's still a wildly successful game. So with a lot of the games that are being released that have this sort of safe and disinfected approach to their storytelling, the reason a lot of them end up flopping hard is because sometimes they just care more about the fact that their game is important and aware of all these social issues versus just actually having good gameplay. And well, when it comes to Unknown 9 Awakening, it just doesn't seem to have that good of a gameplay. It's like I can almost guarantee you that yes, while Concord did have bad character design, and nobody's really denying that, if Concord just happened to have addicting gameplay and they didn't have a $40 price point of entry, nobody would care that Ultimate Freyna from the First Descendant wasn't on the Concord roster. The game would have still popped off. So it's not that modern topics and inclusivity are all necessarily game killers, but when everything else about the game is caught lacking and like your one redeeming quality is that your game just happens to be diverse, then it's no surprise that the game just eventually flops. And unfortunately, when it comes to Unknown 9 Awakening, it's like the studio that developed it was way too focused on other factors that were not actual good gameplay to be able to develop a good game. They put all their efforts and resources on things that people will never get the chance to experience because, well, they're not going to want to play the game in the first place. It's like they just forgot that at the end of the day, gameplay is king. That's like the one important rule when it comes to game development. I don't really know why these studios just don't go ahead and make movies, because if they care so much about the story and the narrative, not so much the gameplay, well, just make movies at this point, right? Why do you keep trying to make video games? I don't really know. I'm not behind the scenes when it comes to game development, but, you know, thankfully for us, this is a problem within the gaming industry that hopefully will fix itself soon because, you know, studios can only lose so much money, so many millions before they realize that whatever they're focusing on and whatever they're releasing really just isn't working. And of course, they're just gonna have to course correct, go back to making great experiences, which is what people are really asking for, and we'll all be back to being happy and just having some great experiences to play. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about with you guys, so thank you guys for watching.